You're listening to the winning literary show, Off the Shelf Books Talk Radio, live with host Denise Turney, author of the books Long Walk Up, Portia, Love Pour Over Me, Spirals, Love Has Many Faces, and Rosetta's Great Hope. Turn up your dial and get ready for a blast of feature author interviews, 411 on book festivals, writing conferences, and so much more. Ready? Let's go.
I have found that if you love life, life will love you back. And that quote is from Arthur Rubinstein. I have found that if you love life, life will love you back. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our April 27th. This is our last Saturday ever in April 2024 doing Off the Shelf, 18 years on the air. I just want to welcome you to today's Saturday, April 27th show. We have a wonderful, wonderful guest on deck for you. But before we introduce this guest, it is so important, you know, and back to the quote, I have found that if you love life, life will love you back. Sometimes it's kind of hard to do that in this world, the ups and the downs. I believe we all have a reason why we came here. There's a reason why each of us came here. Don't feel like we just were pushed or forced here. And I hope and pray you find a reason for yourself for being here. Which brings up the story of a young girl named Mulliken, 6 years old, and as she, after her mother passes, she's orphaned. And a lot of kids in some countries, they call them street children. They don't have family that they know of. And she finds her way. And, of course, she gets help. But her destiny is so remarkable, so amazing. Her beginning and her end are just worlds apart. If you're looking to be inspired and you know you cannot not fulfill your destiny, you have to do what you came here to do. I encourage you to get a copy of Long Walk Up. Long Walk Up. That book will really, 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 I believe, inspire you and keep you focused on your path. Again, Long Walk Up. You can get it, yours truly. You can get an ebook, paperback, in booksellers anywhere, Walmart, Target, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, you name it. You can get it. If you don't see it on the shelf, just ask the clerk to order you a copy of Long Walk Up by Denise Turney, and they can get a copy of Long Walk Up for you. And now, let us go and meet today's special off-the-shelf guest. And this morning's guest is Rob Schwartz. After doing this show for 18 years, we started on Real Radio, Rainbow Soul. We started out of New York, and then we moved to podcast for 18 years. I can tell you, I have learned something from every single guest. We have had so many different guests on Off the Shelf from all over the world, so many different walks. The one common denominator is story. It has to be whether it's songwriting, a movie, a book, a play. They have to be all things storytelling. So this, again, our special guest this morning is Rob Schwartz, and you're going to learn more about him as you listen to today's show. He is an entrepreneur, a writer, and a producer. Feature films he has worked on include Putty and Bernard and Huey. Rob is also one of the producers of, I hope I say this right, either Onetopia or Onetopia, a festival designed to benefit mental health. As a script editor, Rob has worked with organizations such as NHK World TV in Japan, and for his works, he has appeared in several periodicals including Variety, Newsweek, Time, Interview, and The Hollywood Reporter. And Rob Schwartz is the editor of the book, The Wisdom of Morrie. You guys remembered, was it Tuesdays with Morrie? The Wisdom of Morrie, living and aging creatively and joyfully, and that's something we all are doing, living and aging, regardless of how old we are now. The Wisdom of Morrie, living and aging creatively and joyfully. I encourage you to check Rob Schwartz out online at wisdomofmorrie.com, and that's WisdomofMorrie.com, wisdomofmorrie.com. I'm going to bring him on live, and I'm hoping I'm picking up the right line. Welcome to Off the Shelf, Rob. We're honored to have you here with us this morning.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here.
Oh, my goodness, and doing the research for your interview. I know you've interviewed with a lot of different and major medias, and your dad, he touched the lives of so many people, as I'm sure you're doing as well. Now, the first few questions I'm going to ask you, I ask every guest who comes on the show to give our listeners a little backstory on the guest before I launch into the interview. So to kick it off this morning, Rob, can you tell off-the-shelf listeners where you grew up and what life was like for you growing up?
Sure. I grew up in Brookline, Massachusetts, which is a beautiful town right next to Boston, has its own history. A lot of famous people have come from there. And my father was a professor at Brandeis University, and my mother worked at MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Both of them were in the fields of sociology and social psychology. They both shared that field. It's one of the reasons why they worked together. And, childhood was very sweet. My father was actually quite a beloved professor of sociology at Brandeis, very much in tune with students. I mean, he was at Brandeis in the 60s era, and, Brandeis was a very active campus at that time. And he was actually one of the people who went and negotiated with the students when they had demands, because both the administration and the students trusted him, so he could act as a go-between. But, of course, there's many, many other aspects to his career at Brandeis. And his character and, incredible presence is captured in the book Tuesdays with Morrie, which became this unbelievable bestseller. I mean, completely blew our minds, right, because Tuesdays with Morrie was published after my father passed away. So,
wow. Now, did you have any siblings, or are you an only child?
I have an older brother. The two of us grew up in a nuclear family, the four of us in Brookline. We weren't particularly close to my mother's side of the family. There was a couple of people. And my father had a brother, David, who had one son, Eric, so we were close to them, my cousin on my father's side.
Now, when you were a little boy, Rob, when you were a kid, what did you dream of becoming? What did you want to be when you grew up?
Yeah, that's a difficult question. I don't remember having dreams about what I wanted to be. It's funny because a lot of kids, want to do what their father does, monkey see, monkey do kind of thing. But I didn't aspire to be a university professor. I don't know why. So, it's hard for me to answer. I mean, there's lots of things I enjoyed. I enjoyed reading. I enjoyed some sports, stuff like that. But, I mean, I knew that I was a smaller child, not tiny, but smaller child. I knew that there wasn't a lot of chance that I was going to be a sports star. I was okay at some sports. We loved to play basketball, but I wasn't under any illusion that I could become a professional basketball player.
Okay. Now, what attracted you to film? What pulled you in that direction?
I mean, that's funny because this relates to your show in the sense that I just love storytelling. And, film is in some ways the most powerful storytelling because it's got a visual element. You can use all the, tricks of filmmaking. And, of course, it's all about the story, especially fiction film. But even documentary is about telling the story as well. But fiction film is just so powerful. I mean, reading a book is great, and we all read books because of the story. But storytelling is just the basis of film, and I love stories. I love to hear about people and, overcoming challenges and whatever their story is. So that's absolutely what attracted me to filmmaking.
Now, as we start to get ready to talk about the Wisdom of Morrie, just two more questions before we get into that book. For our off-the-shelf listeners around the world who might not be familiar with a phenomenal bestseller, Tuesdays with Morrie, please tell us your connection, because everybody might not know. You kind of alluded to it earlier, but your connection to Morrie.
well, Morrie is my father. Morrie is my dad. We grew up, as I said, in Brookline, Massachusetts. I was very, very close to my dad. And I'll give a little backstory of how the book Tuesdays with Morrie came about. I actually graduated from university and went off traveling around Asia, and then ended up moving to Japan. And I was living in Japan. I lived in Japan for many, many years. I was living in Japan when my father got ill. So I used to travel back and forth between Japan and the United States to spend time with my dad. And when he was ill, you know, he started talking about what's important in life, what the view is like when you know that you're going to die, when you're facing mortality. And as I mentioned earlier, he was a beloved professor at Brandeis University. So one of his students, who he had been very close to, but he hadn't had any contact for 17 years, one of his students saw him on television on Nightline with Ted Koppel, which used to be, you know, the most important news magazine show on TV. Mitch saw the show and found out that his old professor was dying and came back. He was just going to meet my dad once and say, you know, it was wonderful to have studied with you. But he was so drawn to what my father was saying about life and how to live a good life that he came every week for 14 weeks on a Tuesday. And when my father passed away, he wrote the book Tuesdays with Morrie. And, you know, it wasn't initially a huge bestseller. Oprah, after about a year, Oprah found the book, and she loved it so much. She put it on her Book of the Month club, and she had Mitch on her TV show. And then the book skyrocketed to number one on the New York Times bestseller list, hardback nonfiction. And it stayed there for 5 years, which is the crazy part. 5 years consecutively. I have a newspaper.
Oh my gosh!
That has like 200 weeks on the list, which is a little bit shy of 5 years, but it did stay there for 5 years. Number one for 5 years. Sold 18 million copies. It's in 40 different languages. Oprah's production company made a movie, which we can also talk about. Mitch wrote a play, which is performed all over the country constantly and all over the world. I can talk about doing Q&A after the play in all sorts of crazy countries around the world. So, yeah, it's really amazing. And all the time, because, as I said, I was based in Japan, spent a lot of time in Asia in the last 25 years. People from all sorts of international countries would come up to me when they found out who my father was and say, you know, Tuesdays with Morrie was so meaningful for me, and so powerful, and it helped me so much, and it was just incredible. It still is, but I mean, I think there are maybe some of your listeners who don't know the book, because let's say between the years, let's say 2000 and 2010 or so, it was a cultural touchstone. Like, everybody knew this book. It was in the Simpsons movie, they alluded to it, and just all of these cultural things in the United States, it seemed like everybody knew it. These days, it's less so. I mean, the book is now published like 27 years ago. So if you're, let's say, 30, you probably don't know Tuesdays with Morrie, though it was assigned in some high schools as assigned reading. So it's possible. You may know it. But if you're, let's say, over 30 or over 40, I think that there's a very high chance that you've heard of the book, yeah.
Yes, yeah. Now, so did your father, what did the nuggets of wisdom, and what you also include in your book, the wisdom that you added at the Wisdom of Morrie, was he always that way as far back as you can remember, or was there something that happened in his life and he became that way the older he got?
Well, the answer is the former. He was always that way, but it actually is also the latter. There's something that happened in his life that sort of made him that way, and it just happened when he was very young. So the story is, and this is both in the Wisdom of Morrie, the book, as you say, that I edited. That's his book. It's his manuscript, and I edited it and published it last year and titled it The Wisdom of Morrie, and it's also in Tuesdays with Morrie. What happened to my dad was that he lost his mother, his biological mother, when he was very, very young, but old enough to know what was going on and actually have to participate in it. So he lost his mother when he was 8 years old. And, that's a pretty awful blow for a young child. not only did he lose his mother, but they lived in poverty. My father was really poor when he was young. In some ways, he's an incredible American success story, moving from incredible poverty to, university professor in one lifetime, moving through, many different social classes in one lifetime. But getting back to the story, he was very poor, and his mother contracted tuberculosis and, in those days went to the hospital. And then there's a very famous story, which is talked about in Tuesdays with Morrie and also in the Wisdom of Morrie, where the telegram came from the hospital, and he had to translate the telegram for his father, because my grandfather was an immigrant to this country and barely spoke English. So he had to translate the telegram from English into Yiddish for him so he could understand it. So can you imagine an 8-year-old boy having to inform his own father that his wife, the boy's mother, has passed away? It's a pretty traumatic experience for a young boy. And Dad always said that traumatic experience at such a young age sensitized him to the pain and suffering that, everybody endures, and that's why he was so sensitive to it and so aware of other people, because he had that experience as a young child.
Wow. Now, oh, my goodness. And I think those traumatic or very profound experiences, they are what really shape a person's life, but that's the thing we don't want. We don't want those profound.
Right.
We want easy go, comfortable, smooth ride. Now, so Tuesdays with Morrie is a student sitting down with your father, and he writes his book.
An ex-student, yes.
An ex-student. So
right.
The inspiration. So your father, was he working on this manuscript, The Wisdom of Morrie, Living and Aging Creatively and Joyfully, while this book, the student, did your father know the ex-student was writing the book while he was writing his manuscript? Were they being done simultaneously, which would really be amazing?
Okay. No, I'll clarify the timeline for you. It's actually very ironic because, of course, Tuesdays with Morrie came out before The Wisdom of Morrie, much before. But no, my father actually wrote this book between 1989 and 1992. So, more than 30 years ago. So he wrote it before Tuesdays with Morrie. Not only did he write it before Tuesdays with Morrie, which, as I mentioned earlier, was actually written after my father passed away. So it couldn't have been simultaneously because my father wasn't even around. But he wrote The Wisdom of Morrie before he got ill, right? He was very sensitive to, people's lives, and he had lots of ideas on how to live joyfully and creatively, as is in this book, and was very sensitive to people's stories and talked to lots and lots of people, and decided that he wanted to try and help people age a little bit more joyfully, right? This book, it's funny because Tuesdays with Morrie is really about death, facing death, but the Wisdom of Morrie is about aging, not about dying. There's nothing in the book actually about dying whatsoever. It's about how to live your life really creatively and joyfully as you age. And he's got lots and lots of ideas for people and lots of advice. He also just weaves through the book so many stories of people of all ages who are, making the most of their lives, who are trying new things at whatever age they are. And it's not only his thoughts, which there are a lot of, but there's also quotes from other books and newspaper clippings and stories and all sorts of different approaches presenting the idea that you really can live a happy and fulfilled and creative and joyful life at any age, right? And if you're having trouble doing that, my father gives you a lot of different techniques to try in this book and things to think about.
Now, I have to ask you this. How tough was it to actually, first of all, how did you come across the manuscript? Did your dad tell you about it, hand it to you? Did you discover it after he passed as you were going through his belongings? How did you discover the manuscripts? And what was it like for you as you were editing it, reading through your father's writings? I can imagine for myself it might have been very emotional. What was that like, and how did you come across? Did he just give you the manuscripts, or did you come across them on your own?
Right. So there's two questions there, and I will answer them both. And the first one is a two-part answer. So I actually, as I mentioned, went to Asia and came home. And when I came home, it was the summer of 1989, and my father was writing this book. So I actually saw my father writing this book and talked to him about the ideas. So I knew well about this book because he was writing it, and I was actually able to talk to him about it for a few months in the summer of 1989. Then I moved to Japan, and he completed the book. I did go back and forth a bit, but that was the last time I ever lived under the same roof with him for a long stretch of time. So I knew all about the book. I had talked to him about the ideas in the book, and then he finished it, and he attempted to publish it, and he wasn't able to publish it at that time. But shortly after he finished it, he got ill, and then we moved into the whole Tuesdays with Morrie phase, and he became ill, and he passed away, and then he became very famous posthumously, and that was what happened. And I realized we would have an opportunity to publish this manuscript, which he had written some, before. And the story of finding the manuscript is a fun one, too. I used to come back and forth between Japan and Boston, where my mother was. She had the house. She had my father's study, just like it had been when he was alive. And one day I was writing, I was a journalist. I am a journalist, and I was writing my journalistic pieces, and I pulled open my father's desk drawer, and I found this big black bound thing. I mean, it's really big. And I flipped it open. I was like, what's this? I flipped it open, and I realized this was the manuscript that my father had worked on so long and so hard, and it was just sitting there in the drawer. And I decided, okay, we need to publish this. Now, it was a long road publishing it. It was, and then I can explain why it took me so long to publish it. But at that time I found it, and I knew that there was a tremendous amount of good ideas in it. I had talked to my father about this book while he was writing it. I felt very connected to it. I knew that it would take a lot of editing, and we can talk about why that is. But I was super excited about it. And you asked how it was editing it. I mean, it was actually a real joy to edit it, because I edited it over many years, many times. And my father's voice is so clear and so strong. He had a very individual way of expressing himself and making his points. And it's so, loving and carefully written in that way. And, of course, editing it, my main task was to maintain his voice and maintain that atmosphere that he created when he wrote it. And I think I was able to do that. Now, you have to remember, my father was a university professor, and they tend to be a little bit verbose. So I had to, cut a lot, and he wrote it over a few years, so there was nobody had ever edited this book, so there was repetition in there. There was things that needed to be corrected a little bit, but I didn't add anything. I mean, I added an essay at the beginning and an essay at the end, but everything in between those is my father's writing. I didn't add my own writing into that, so it's all him. It's 100% him.
Why do you think it took you several years? Was your life busy with film, and you had a lot of other projects going on, and you were finding the time somewhere to edit the Wisdom of Morrie?
Yeah, that's more or less right. I mean, it's actually even a more sort of roundabout story than that, and I explain it a little bit in the second essay that I add to the book, which is about my mother. See, my mother was, as I mentioned earlier, in the same field as my dad, and so we can give a little bit of backstory about my father, which if people are really into Tuesdays with Morrie, they might know, but most of your listeners won't know. So my father actually wrote a book a long, long time ago called The Mental Hospital, which was a huge breakthrough in mental health care and actually became a textbook for psychologists. And after that, he wrote a couple of books as well. But that book sort of made him a superstar in the field of social psychology, and he became very famous because of it. Well, my mother actually edited that book because my father has great ideas, but his writing definitely takes some editing. I mean, my father wrote that book with a famous psychiatrist at the time called Alfred Stanton, but basically my father did all the research, and my mother and father wrote the book together. And this was also true of my father's later books. My mother edited them. Sometimes she got credit, and sometimes she didn't get credit, like The Mental Hospital. She didn't get any credit for that. Finally, towards the end of his academic career, actually in the middle of it, they wrote a book together because it was just so obvious that my mother was contributing so much, she should be a main author. But the point of this story is that my mother had a very, very strong idea and a strong understanding on how to edit my father's writing. So she basically helped me in the beginning. She would edit like 10 pages. And she also had a full-time profession. She was, at this time, a psychologist and had her private practice. So she was also very busy. And remember, I was still living in Japan and coming back and forth. And as you said, I had a lot of projects on in Japan. I was working for a TV station. I was producing film. I had my own record label in Japan for many years. I had a tremendous amount of projects. So it took time to be able to give enough time to this project and move forward enough that I was able to look for an agent and get an agent and have the agent push it to publishers. It's a real process to publish a book in a major publishing house, right? Self-publishing is one thing, but this is published by a publishing house, and it's a long process.
So let me ask you this. Tuesdays with Morrie was such a phenomenal success. Number one, was your family involved in any way with that, and do you get any of the royalties? Number one. Number two, I would think that would make getting the Wisdom of Morrie published very, very easy. Was that the case?
Right. Okay. So another two questions. I'll try and remember both of them. So, was my family involved with Tuesdays with Morrie? Yes, in many, many different ways, which I'll outline. As far as the text goes, the way that we were most involved was through me, because when my father was alive, the last, let's say, year of his life, he had ALS, and there's no treatment for it. There are a few treatments these days. At that time, 27 years ago, 28 years ago, there was no treatment for it. So we knew that he was going to pass away. So what I did was, and at the same time, as I mentioned earlier, he loved to talk to people. He set up all of these groups and all of these individual meetings with people where he was talking about life and what's important and values and how to live a meaningful life. So I set up a video camera, and I recorded hours and hours of my father talking and meeting people. And after he passed away, Mitch sat down to write Tuesdays with Morrie, and Mitch asked me to send him the videotapes of my father that I had taped. Now, Mitch had interviewed or, talked with my father for 14 consecutive weeks, so he had lots of material, but he also took these videotapes. And, in fact, some of the scenes in the book, Tuesdays with Morrie, are based on the videotape that I sent Mitch, that Mitch wasn't even present for. So in that way, I contributed to the writing of Tuesdays with Morrie. I mean, it's Mitch's book. He's a brilliant writer, which is why it sold 18 million copies. And I don't know, your listeners probably know who Mitch Albom is because he's written like 9 bestsellers since then. He has a new book out right now, which is called The Little Liar, which is as powerful as all of his books are. Other of his books have been made into movies and stuff. It's just been phenomenally successful after Tuesdays with Morrie, it's really interesting because before Tuesdays with Morrie, he was known as a sports writer out of Detroit, Michigan. He wrote for a newspaper in Detroit, and that's it. I mean, he was a well-known sports writer, but just a sports writer. He didn't write books. But after Tuesdays with Morrie, he wrote novels, and he's written all sorts of stuff in book form. In any case, to get back to your question, Wait a minute. Which sorry, what was your question again?
So for the question, so do you guys get any any of the royalties, or did you get any royalties?
Mitch is very generous. Mitch is very generous with the royalties. There was an agreement between my father and Mitch about that before my dad passed away. Oh, right. You also asked previously, did my father know that Mitch was going to write the book? He did know that Mitch was going to write the book because Mitch had already pitched the idea and gotten it accepted by one publishing house. So they made an agreement about the royalties, and Mitch has adhered to that agreement for decades and decades. So we're really, really thankful and grateful to him about that.
So was it easy? That was my next question. When you came out with the Wisdom of Morrie, was it very easy to get a traditional publisher to pick it up, put a lot of marketing dollars behind it? Was that an easy process? Because unfortunately, no. And this relates to what I was talking about earlier, is that there was a huge time gap between the Wisdom of Morrie coming out and when Tuesdays with Morrie came out. Tuesdays with Morrie was published in 1997, if you can believe that, and became a bestseller in 1998, as I was alluding to earlier. So from 2000, after it had been on the bestseller list for about 2 years, consecutively number one, till from about 2000 to about 2010, everybody knew this book because it just sold so many copies, and there's, as I said, a movie and a play, and it just became a cultural touchstone in the United States. But after about 2010, 2015, it hadn't been on the bestseller list for many years, it starts to fade. So I didn't start bringing this book into publishers until, around that time, actually post-pandemic. I would have done it before the pandemic, but then the pandemic happened. So, so we're talking 2020, 2021. And, Tuesdays with Morrie was pretty far in the past at that point. So publishers, of course they knew Tuesdays with Morrie, and of course they knew my father. Anybody in the book industry, in the publishing industry, knows Tuesdays with Morrie. It's an absolute phenomenon. I mean, I've heard Tuesdays with Morrie called the best-selling memoir of all time, which is totally crazy. And I don't know if it's true or not. I've just heard people say that. It may be true. I can't think of a memoir that's as famous. But in terms of, some 20 years later, book publishers had some interest, but they didn't jump all over it. And, Blackstone, who accepted the book, I was really happy because they did make it a priority. And not only that, they were very responsive to me. If I'd gone with a really massive publisher like Penguin or whatever, I think they would have been less responsive and less attentive to what I wanted. All of the artistic design of the book is my idea. Of course, we had an art director, and she was fantastic, and she employed all of the ideas that I wanted. If you see the book, you'll see it's very colorful. I wanted it to look very colorful, and not only the cover, but we have color running through the book. There's different colored pages in this book. And as I said, there's so many different types of writing in this book. There's newspaper clippings, and there's quotes from other books, and we use different typefaces. I wanted things to be in different typefaces, including stuff that looks handwritten, because this is a really personal book to my dad. He's telling stories about himself and his family and aging and other people's family and, personal stories and stuff. So I wanted it to have that feel of it looking different than other books and engaging the reader. And Blackstone took all of those artistic ideas and employed them in the book, and I was really, really happy. So to answer your question, it wasn't easy, but I think I found the right publisher, and I'm really happy about that. Awesome. Can you share from the Wisdom of Morrie 3 choices or actions from the book that our listeners can consider or actually incorporate into their lives to age more joyfully? More joyfully. Absolutely.
I feel like there's usually there's many ideas in the book, but there's usually a list of 5 that I go through. So maybe I'll do more than 3. But anyways, I'll run through them. We'll see how we go. So the first one is kind of surprising because people don't really think about this, but once you hear it, it makes so much sense. So my father found that some people, not everybody, but some people, when they age, get really sort of dour and humorless. And he thought that this was really crazy and you know, absolutely a recipe for disaster. He thought it was so important that people incorporate humor into their life and laugh as much as possible. So he says, you know, find whatever makes you laugh and pursue that. So he thought that laughter was just an essential ingredient in life and that you should try and laugh as much as possible. And so this is one of the things that he talks about in the book. I'll add a little aside here because I love this. So, you know, I think we both, or all of us have seen that there's really, people go in one direction or another when they age. Either they become sort of cold and humorless, or some people become softer and more kind when they age, right? It tends to, the people go one way or the other. And the Japanese have a wonderful expression about aging and some people. They say maruku naru, which means you become rounder. And this basically means you become kinder and softer, to become rounder. In any case, laughter is the first one that I give. The second technique that my father, or idea that my father suggests to people, and this one has actually been backed up by studies, and you'll see sort of how prophetic he is when you realize this book is written 30 plus years ago. After laughter, almost the exact opposite, my father said, it's really important to calm your mind and focus your energy as you age because you have less energy. So you need to focus it to use it effectively. And a fantastic technique to do this is meditation. So my father was a big enthusiast of meditation. There are many, many different types of meditation. He was saying, you know, you find the one that works best for you. And, you know, it's just a technique. You don't have to associate it with any spiritual path or any tradition or anything like that. You just use this technique to focus your mind, to remain calm and focus your energy. And he was meditating from, you know, all of the time that I knew him, but he became more concentrated about it the older he got, and especially when he got sick. So that's the second technique. The third is that, you know, this book is aimed at aging people. Maybe, you know, you're retired, or maybe you work less than you worked before. You have some free time. One of my father's insights were, you know, people work their whole lives, and some people even work in jobs that they don't like, right? And they don't really concentrate. After a certain age, you're not really thinking about what really interests you and what really excites you. So my father suggested that you should concentrate on, you should explore what really excites you, what really interests you, and then pursue that, whatever it is. If it's, you know, something like history, or something that's, you know, that you can read about, you can study, or something that's an activity that you really enjoy, like a sport or a game, whatever it is, pursue what really interests you and develop it. You know, study about it, develop it, get more involved in it. You know, use your energy for something that that really interests you, that you really enjoy. This is one of the things. My father did a lot of research for this book, The Wisdom of Morrie, and he found that people don't really do that. They don't really, you know, when they have free time, pursue what really interests them and what they really enjoy. So he thought that this was absolutely crucial. And along those lines, he thought that, and this was sort of a theme that runs through his whole life, that what the meaning of life, what gives our life meaning, is our relationships with other people. Mm-hmm. So he thought it was absolutely crucial that you strengthen those relationships. Of course, the most important relationships in your life, your family, but also, you know, your close friends and other friends, and even making new relationships. You know, people after a certain age tend to not meet new people and not make new relationships, and he thought that this was wrong, that you should try and meet as many new people as possible and make new friends. And this, of course, dovetails perfectly with the third technique, which is pursue something that you're interested in, learn something new, Well, if you're in a class about something or you're learning something or pursuing some hobby, you're going to meet people who are interested in that, and you share this interest with them so you can make a connection with them. He thought this was really important to living, a full and vibrant and joyful life. So there's 4. There's a bunch more, but since you only asked for 3, I'll leave it there.
No, thank you so much for sharing those. And different countries, you said you lived in Japan, so different cultures approach aging differently. Was it your father's experience and also yours having lived in another country? Is it American or a Western way that we almost see ourselves getting older as, I'm going to say less important, but almost like you just, even at jobs, people will say, and people they're not supposed to do this, but you hear people say, how do you think she is? How do you think he is? Do you think he probably should just go ahead and get ready to retire? What do you think? You think he's going to retire? I hear this. I mean, I'm telling you. And they won't say it openly, but age is a big, huge thing, at least in America. I don't know about in other countries. And it's not viewed. It's not viewed positively. It's almost like, now you're going to be a burden on the healthcare system.
Right.
Somebody's going to have to take care of you. It's really not. It's really not viewed. So you said your father thought many people give up on living fully as they age. Is that part of a cultural, societal push to do that?
Right. Well, I should wind back because we actually haven't talked about ageism much when I was describing the Wisdom of Morrie, and the ageism and the whole sort of like prejudice against people over a certain age, whatever it is, whatever that age is, that prejudice in our society, in American society, is actually the reason why my father wrote this book. And he was reacting against the idea that after a certain age you're, useless and you don't have any function in life and you should just go sit in the corner. That was the whole impetus for him to write this book, to show that idea is absurd and that, people over a certain age, whatever age you want to ascribe that to, have a lot of experience in life, have a lot of knowledge, have a lot that they can share with people and teach people, and also can enjoy and experience life, really fully. That is exactly the impetus to write this book, so much so that my father actually coined his own term. Of course, he talks about ageism in the book. He coined this term age casting, which comes from the movie term typecasting, where, an actor can only play one type of role. He's always forced into one type of role. And he says this is exactly what happens to people over a certain age. They're age casted into a role where they are just useless for society. And he thought that this was just ridiculous, that people, over a certain age have so much to offer society and also offer to other people that they meet as friends or whatever. So that was the huge impetus for my father to write the book. As to your question about other cultures, absolutely cultures in Asia, particularly Japan and China and India, though I would say China is probably slipping a little bit because of the political situation there. But certainly traditionally, those 3 cultures, much more venerated aged people over a certain age and respected them. And it's definitely a trait of American culture where we're so concentrated on youth and people, who are even, extremely young, whatever, teenagers or in their 20s, dominate pop culture and in some ways the general culture in the United States. And, this is not universal. This is not the way it is in other societies for sure. And that's something that I experienced. I lived in Japan for quite a long time. So that's something I experienced very deeply in Japan. And now my father didn't live outside the United States, but he was aware that other cultures were not the same as the U.S., and he writes about that in the book as well. So, he didn't live there. He's certainly aware of it, and he includes all kinds of stories from different cultures about people of, whatever age doing whatever. My favorite of those stories is, and I think this one actually comes from a newspaper article, is he has a story of a guy who's 95 who has just graduated from university and plans on becoming a doctor.
Go ahead. Okay. Good for him.
Exactly. And we all understand that, he may not make it to actually being a doctor, but that's not the point. He's doing something that he finds valuable,
yes.
that he finds important, that enlivens him, and also, he may be able to help people informally, not as a licensed doctor, but, with the knowledge that he's obtained, both from studying for being a doctor and also just for having lived that long in the world,
Yes. With America aging, the population is just growing, and we actually are living longer, and some of us may work our entire life. Some people tell me they're never going to retire. They don't want to, and they're not going to. I can see where the book, The Wisdom of Morrie, Living and Aging Creatively and Joyfully, particularly in the U.S., could have impact, and for that I hope you get out to organizations where there are these aging populations, and I'm always happy when I hear somebody in their 80s or 90s go into college. Some people do. They go to college.
Absolutely.
They may start a business. It's not over until it's over, and it's don't just give up and just sit like you said, sit in a corner somewhere while you still have life in you. So really appreciate and thank you for, especially, again, with the American population, although books go global, but our population in the U.S. aging, growing, people living longer, and some don't ever want to retire, to come out with The Wisdom of Morrie, Living and Aging Creatively and Joyfully, could be very, very timely right now. But and now I'm going to shift slightly because you've done so many things, and we're coming close on the end of today's show, but I want to touch on some of your other works. You've done work across books, film, television, so many. I wanted to ask you, though, as a movie producer or film producer,
Sure.
So can you tell us about your films and your work in these films, the inspiration behind Putty Hill and Bernard and Huey?
Sure. Putty Hill is actually a wonderful film made by a filmmaker out of Baltimore, and Putty Hill is actually a neighborhood in Baltimore. So Putty Hill is one of these films where it's fiction, but it's heavily based in reality, and it's kind of a very serious story of teenagers from this rough section. Putty Hill is kind of a rough section, a section where they don't have a lot of money in Baltimore, and it's the reaction of the community when one of the teenagers commits suicide. So it's a very serious film, but it's also, very moving and searing and has a lot of insight into life. So I really, really enjoyed working on that film, and indeed, it won a bunch of awards. Bernard and Huey is almost the not exactly the polar opposite, but is a sort of a rom-com. It's a comedy that was based on a script written by a scriptwriter and an award-winning cartoonist named Jules Pfeiffer. And I think your listeners will have to be fairly up in the years to remember who Jules Pfeiffer is, because he was super famous in like the 60s and 70s and 80s for his cartoons in The Village Voice and The New Yorker. He had a whole series of cartoons, and one of his series was about two guys who were kind of past their prime, and their names were Bernard and Huey. And then he wrote a script about these two guys, but it never got made into a film. So we revived it like 2017, 2018 with this great director named Dan Mervish, who is a guy who co-founded the Slam Dance Film Festival, which is now a legendary film festival. And it's kind of a romantic comedy about relationships and about getting a little bit older. It's really a funny story because in college you have these two guys, and one was sort of like the ladies' man, and the other guy was sort of like the shy introverted, unpopular guy. And it's now like 25 years later, and their roles have switched. The guy who was shy and introverted is now successful, and the guy who was the ladies' man is sort of unsuccessful and not very popular with women anymore. So, and they meet each other after like not having seen each other for 25 years. So it's a really interesting and fun story. The script is wonderful, and Dan did an absolute fantastic job with it. That film also won a bunch of awards, and I was really, really happy with it. So those are the films. I'll just give you a couple of other things that I've done. I also have some films that I'm working on now, both documentary and fiction. I'll talk about one of my documentary films because we're actually probably going to start fundraising for it. I met a friend in Japan. I had a friend in Japan who was really close, was a very successful guy. I knew this guy for decades and decades before I found out that both his mother and his uncle, in other words, his mother's sister, his mother's brother, were rescued from German Nazi prison camps during the war by French families that didn't even know them, that smuggled them out of these camps and raised them just out of the goodness of their hearts. And that's how these children survived the war. It's absolutely an incredible story. I mean, I won't go into too much detail, but we're fundraising for that now. So if anybody is moved by that story and wants to get in touch with me, you said the website that people can write to me through the website, wisdomofmorrie.com. I'll also give you an email address that you can put up on your site that people can send me email at. So I'm working on that documentary. I have some feature films that I'm developing that hopefully will come about soon. And then I'm actually working on 2 benefit festivals now. One is smaller and going to be in California. I'm not exactly sure the date, but people can keep up with me on that one. And then the other one, which you mentioned, you got it right the first time, is called Onetopia. Is going to be a big music festival to benefit mental health. That's going to be in May of 2025. So those are 2 music festivals that I'm working on. And, yeah, I also have a long history working in the music industry in Japan, starting my own record label and that sort of thing. So that's a bit of a project.
Whoa,
that's enough.
Oh, my gosh. Have you always juggled 2 or more projects? Is that like a part of you, or is that something new? Have you always, it seemed like you've always, since you were very young, have you always found yourself, it's the 2 or more things you got going?
Absolutely. I mean, especially in my professional career. So I basically moved to Japan and became a freelance journalist. And, you know, when you're a freelance journalist, you have to be juggling different stories, different articles, researching different things. You have to be juggling many things at the same time. And so that's always been a part of my professional life. And, you know, I was writing about music and film when I was in Japan, so that's how I got involved with those fields as a profession. You know, you're writing about it, you know a lot about it, so you might as well start creating in it as well. But yes, absolutely, that's always been a big part of who I am, is working on many different things simultaneously.
What inspired you to create Onetopia? What was it that made?
Well, I have to be very direct and honest about that. Sorry, Onetopia is not my vision. Onetopia is the vision of an artist and an entrepreneur out of Dubai. He's actually a German guy, but he lives in Dubai. His name is Evan Clausen. And it's his vision, his hope that we can raise money. And he started the foundation called Onetopia, and we can raise money and distribute money to mental health groups and raise awareness about mental health in the United States and in the world. And I met him because he's a musical artist as well at a music conference, and we just really hit it off. We really, had a great connection over this idea. And, of course, it was my father's life work was about mental health. So that really, is very much in tune with what I was working on with Tuesdays with Morrie and my father's legacy. So we decided to work together. There's actually three producers who are working together on this, and I'm one of them. So I can't claim that it's my vision or I founded it in any way, but I'm very, very happy to work on it with Evan, and it's his vision, as we say. He's the founder.
I want to ask you this before we go. When I think about movies, when I hear producer, I always think the person who funded the film. do producers actually get involved in the creation? They don't do. That's the director and the writer. Do they get involved in any way in that, or no? They're not on the set ever?
Absolutely no. Producers, well, depends. I mean, it's kind of a complicated question, but I'll simplify it a bit and say yes. I mean, there are some producers that only raise money, and usually that's called executive producer, right? If you're an executive producer, it usually means that you were behind the funding of the film. If your title is producer, that usually means that you were involved in the creative aspect. And there are some producers that are actually more important for the creativity of the film than the director. There's some producers that will put together the whole team, that will handpick the whole team for a film. They'll choose the director, they'll choose the editor, they'll choose the sound designer, they'll choose the costume designer, they'll choose the casting director. All of those people have a huge impact on how the story turns out, how the film turns out. And if you're an actual producer doing that, putting the whole team together, then you are absolutely as much a part of the storytelling as the director is. Now, there are some, films are put together in all sorts of different ways. If you're a famous director, then usually the producer has a lot less input because you're a famous director. So you decide, I want this casting director, I want this costume designer, I want this sound designer, I want this editor, I want this cinematographer. If you're a famous director, you have a vision for your film, and you choose all those people. If you're not a famous director, there's a lot of directors in the film world who are just directors for hire. They're just sitting around waiting for a call from some producer saying, we have this project, here's the script, would you like to direct it? And those producers have a lot of creative input into the project. They may even watch some of the footage of the director and say, you're not quite getting it. You need to reshoot this and do this and that. I mean, there's a lot of producers that will have, very much direct input into how the film is made. And then in other cases, none at all. If the project is put together by someone who's famous, and this is very much how the film world works, that means they have a lot of power. They have a lot of clout. When Tom Cruise works on a project, it's a Tom Cruise project, right?
Okay.
If you're a famous director, when Christopher Nolan makes a film, it's a Christopher Nolan project. He doesn't take direction from anybody. He doesn't take idea. I mean, he may listen to some other people, but it's all his decision. So it really depends on who is involved in the project. When you work on the indie side, like I do, it's much more of a collaborative thing. The producer and the director and other important people get together and talk. And so, yes, the producer has a creative input. But, in the indie world, certainly the director is also extremely important.
Oh, my goodness. We are coming to the end of what you are just a phenomenal person. Rob, just yourself speaking with you. To bring it back full circle to the Wisdom of Morrie, I wanted to ask you, what have your relatives and other readers been saying? What have you been hearing from them about the Wisdom of Morrie, living and aging creatively and joyfully?
Sure. So first of all, the first person, as I mentioned earlier, is my mother. My mother was extremely encouraging on this project. Unfortunately, she passed away in 2021. So, that she encouraged me, and she knew that the book was getting published, and she saw edited versions of it, but she wasn't around for the final version. But everybody else has been really supportive. I have cousins. Of course, everybody has copies of it. My brother is very, very happy with the book. And, I tried to, if you see a copy of the book, you'll see I tried to make it a really personal experience for the reader, one with the design, but also, my father is so well known because of Tuesdays with Morrie. People are really curious about him. I mentioned earlier there's a play, and the play is performed all over the country and all over the world. I've traveled all over the place, including internationally, to do Q&A after the play because people are so interested in my father, and they so much want to make a personal connection with him. They want to hear about the real man. So that's one thing that I've been doing. In the Wisdom of Morrie, I include a lot of our family photos in the book and photos of my father at different ages, so people can see him and realize that, he had this long and fruitful life, and Tuesdays with Morrie was just at the very end of his life. And there's also not any photos, or maybe one, but essentially there's no photos in Tuesdays with Morrie. So I truly tried to make the Wisdom of Morrie something that people can relate to personally and get a feeling like they really know Morrie on a deeper level, right? Because people feel such a strong connection to my dad. It's so wonderful. They feel such a strong connection to him, and they never met him. They only started reading about him after he passed away. So I really wanted to strengthen that and offer something to people who were interested in him.
Oh, my goodness. We are out of time. What a treat, what a treat. If you came in midstream, no worries to today's show. Once it finishes streaming, you can go back, listen to it in its archives as many times as you like. Share it with other people who you think would absolutely love, particularly somebody who might be aging. But Rob Schwartz, Morrie's son, does so many different things that if you just like all things story, arts, entertainment, mental health, it's just so many different aspects of him, what Rob Schwartz does, and his work that you could enjoy. Once this show finishes in streaming, you can listen to it in the archives and share it with other people. And also visit Rob Schwartz online at Wisdom of Morrie, WisdomofMorrie.com. And this is Morrie's son. He's involved in different festivals and music and film, books. He just is an editor, journalist. He's done so many different things and been in Variety, Newsweek, Time, interviewed a Hollywood reporter, etc. Again, I encourage you to visit him online, Wisdom of Morrie, Morrie, wisdomofmorrie.com. And again, the book, The Wisdom of Morrie, Living and Aging Creatively and Joyfully, something that you can benefit from regardless of your age, because we all are living and we all are aging regardless of how long we've been here in this world.
So
Thank you.
Thank
you so much, Rob, and wish you so much success with the different. Your hands are full. The different projects that you are working on, and how much you give back through your projects to others.
Well,
so thank
you. And
thank you for that.
having me on the show. Yeah.
And to our listeners, as I always tell you, you are incredible. You are phenomenal. Go out and create a fabulous day for yourself. See you back here next Saturday, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time or New York City time, and we'll have another awesome guest here for you on Off the Shelf. I will send you and your publicist a link to the show when it finishes streaming, Rob. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Denise.
Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.